All right, I think we can get started now. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Levi Wolf, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Rachel Franklin and Daniel Arribas-Bel. And we, with the Spatial Analytics and Data seminar series, brought to you by Newcastle University, Bristol University, and the Alan Turing Institute, we've been putting on these interviews with sort of movers and shakers in the spatial analytics and data area. And so today is the, I think, 6th of the interviews that we've done with people in the field. We'd like today to welcome Professor Sara Fabrikant from the University of Zurich for a nice friendly chat. How the interview will work is that it'll be split into 3 parts. I'll talk with Dr. Fabrikant about her past, her sort of trajectory going from her sort of early days in the field all the way up to now. And then Danny will talk a little bit about research and big ideas about spatial analytics and data that Professor Fabrikant has been engaged with throughout her career. And then finally, Rachel will provide a more reflective, personal perspective on sort of guests at dinner parties, favorite books, big ideas, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end, bearing with the slight delay. So with that, Professor Fabrikant leads the Geographic Information and Visualization Analytics group at the GIScience Center in the Geography department at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Her research and teaching interests lie in geographic information visualization and geovisual analytics, GIScience, and cognition. She's currently an elected member of the Swiss Science Council, co-initiator and past director of the University of Zurich Digital Society Initiative. So please, digitally, give a warm welcome to Professor Fabrikant.
Hello, everybody.
So let me just spotlight. I don't think I can do that. So Rachel and Danny, if you want to turn off your videos, this should be fine. Great. So, hello.
Hello, Levi. Hello, Rachel, and hello, Danny, and hello, everyone in cyberspace.
Thank you very much for joining us today. What I'd like to ask is, what are you working on right now? What gets your kind of creative mind going at the moment?
Well, we just had a quick chat of this morning's lecture and teaching, and it's about cognitive issues in GI science. And there I was telling Rachel that one of my PhD student, junior scholars in the group, was actually presenting her PhD related work. So, and this is really what excites me right now. This is a project, a larger project that is funded by the EU, which is a special plug here. I'm super grateful that in Switzerland, being excluded from Horizon currently 2020, we still can do this funded research from the ERC, the European Research Council. And Bingjay was telling this morning the class that she's thinking about assistive technology to help people getting not only efficiently from A to B, using a map, let's say, or a display maybe on your retina, maybe in the future, but also help people not forget to self-orient and to navigate themselves in space. So it's this idea of developing tools that allow people to stay human and not rely completely off technology. And so this is the kind of idea that we are discussing, working on, running empirical research. And Bingjay Cheng is a neuroscientist by training. So she's updating me on the latest in neuroscience, and she's learning our cool spatial analytic tools and ways to represent the world. So, and she's one of 4 people, and I can relate back to those people that are now currently working with me together on these ideas.
That's fascinating. It's so usefully encapsulates your interest in sort of cognition and behavior throughout your entire career. Taking a kind of step back to that, how did you get interested in that? What was your kind of undergraduate like in Switzerland, and was it always so kind of behaviorally oriented?
Actually, not at all. In fact, I wanted to become a sports journalist, and maybe we will talk about this with Rachel later, my greatest regret. And so, I was like a person like history and things like that, mass media that interested me. And suddenly I woke up and I got a degree in geography, where we can talk about this later. But so geography was also something that interested me in high school. Maybe that's important to say. In Switzerland, geography is really, still an important subject in high school, unlike other places in the world. And so I also then chose geography as a side or a minor subject, and then switched just the emphasis. And there was very traditional, like physical geography, human geography. And then I discovered, there's this thing called maps and cartography. And so I got very early on into this cartography map making idea and field and techniques. And I got actually a minor in cartography at the ETH Zurich, as this school next to the one that you see in the back, which is the University of Zurich. And then we created things, and then this GIS thing came up, and early 90s. It's like we could make these maps with digital tools on a computer. Super exciting. So and then I had a colleague, a peer, and she was ahead of me in the curriculum, and she did her master thesis doing an empirical study, an experiment on how people understand cartograms. And I was one of her test subjects, participants. And I was so fascinated that you could do this psychological experiment and find out how people understand these weird maps. And this, I then knew, it was too late for my master thesis to change that topic, but I knew when I grow up, I will be doing some psychological thing with maps or geography. Yeah. And so that's basically
very cool. So that was like the spark, huh?
That was the spark, definitely.
That's so neat. So then you went on from that to be very interested again in running this kind of experiment with Dr. Barbara Buttonfield at Colorado Boulder. What drew you to Professor Buttonfield, and what drew you to Boulder?
Very simply, I really read the work by Barbara Buttonfield, Professor Buttonfield, aka Babs, as she told us the first day, my name is Babs, so I will refer to Babs. And so she had done all these sort of formalization work. I have visual variables, how you represent space, and she was really sort of more into generalization, but she had also done this visualization in more general terms research. And I was reading these papers for my master thesis in visualization, so that already then my master thesis was related to not evaluating but developing a tool to visualize the passenger flows on the Swiss railway network. And so I was reading all the visualization papers coming from Babs and her colleagues, and then of course Penn State in the early 90s. So all these ways to animate the world sort of represented in a computer. So that was the first way that we could, with computers, animate maps. And so I was super excited about that. And that is actually the reason. So cartographic animation, dynamic representations was really what I did for my master's. And I was excited to be able to perhaps continue this line, which was not available. This was not a research topic at Zurich University, where I got my degree. Generalization was a big topic, spatial data handling, terrain visualization or modeling terrain. And then for the things I wanted to do, it was clear I had to leave. And Robert Weibel, my master thesis advisor, said, I know Babs from Buffalo. You should send her an email. I'm like, you can send emails to professors, really? And so we did, and he helped me, and so the connection was made. And yeah, the rest is history.
Did it feel like the place to be at the time for you, or was it, this link that happened that was just like kind of an accident for you?
Actually, I have to say, oh my God, my geography. It was a huge accident because, of course, Barbara Buttonfield was working at NCGIA in Buffalo. And, the B words, Buffalo, Boulder, Santa Barbara, the B names. And so I didn't really understand that, or I did understand that she then moved to Boulder, and I had no idea where Boulder was. And, I looked it up, of course, on a map. I'm a geographer, right? A cartographer. And I realized what a beautiful place it is after it became clear that she was really transitioning in that year. So I actually, the cohort, we were the first cohort, her students in Boulder when she also arrived. And so that was in 96. Mm-hmm. And so I discovered this beautiful place, right? And of all places, I know what Buffalo looks like. So that was a very different kind of place to be. And Barbara Buttonfield was building the GIS lab anew, if you like. So she came in and sort of rebuilt the program in many ways, and we were sort of the first cohort. So that was, in this sense, exciting because we were part of this new wave of GI science at Boulder. Let's put it this way. Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. I mean, it's sounds like a really active place, but then also a bit of an accident as well. So I'm a bit curious then. So you did your PhD at Boulder. You had a bit of sort of different things. Did you ever think about going back at that stage? Did you want to work in industry? Of course, we know that you ended up at Santa Barbara shortly after, but can you walk us through, like, after you finished, what you were thinking through?
Yes, definitely. Coming from Switzerland, where there's so few professors, and then maybe 2% female professors, but none in geography, at least where I came from. This was just being in academia was not really sort of on my radar. And in fact, this is when we had these preliminary exams, when you talk about the future with your professors and your committee, it's like, Sarah is going to go become a professor. I'm like, no, I'm actually going to go back to Zurich and be in industry somewhere, because this is what I knew. And I didn't realize that this is not something you say in a top PhD granting in this institution in the US. So I must have shocked my committee terribly. They didn't respond at all. They were very quiet, and it was like, oh, I must have said something wrong. But this was not, it was totally not on my horizon. That was not sort of a job that you could actually get.
So then walk me through how you ended up at Santa Barbara then. How did that kind of transition happen?
So I was actually looking to stay because I had this special visa, this J1 visa, which is this other category of visa that I had that allowed me to stay on and work in the US, mm-hmm. which is, of course, a very coveted, very prestigious thing to have, or at least in those days. And so I wanted to try the work. And so I did apply to places like, and I almost had one that didn't turn out for not my reasons, but other reasons. And so then my committee member, David Mark, on my PhD committee, he contacted me and was like, oh, well, we need a cartographer. Our cartographer left suddenly. Would Sara be interested to come to Buffalo to just, teach a couple of classes, at least for 1 year? And I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to do that, but then I had nothing lined up. And I was like, why not? I'm just going to try that. And being in Buffalo and teaching these classes, and it was a super nice department and interesting people and nice students. So I kind of, I felt actually well and comfortable and doing these things. And then we had a visitor. My co-child visited as a colloquium speaker, and he was just telling everyone, apply, we have a job in Santa Barbara, you should apply. And then he came up to me, he's like, oh yeah, are you looking for a job? What is your thing? And so, yeah, why don't you apply? So I tried. I did apply. I applied other places, and then eventually, it was crazy. I mean, I got this job offer. I remember I was back in Zurich. It was year 2000. Everyone was scared that all computing will break down. And then I got this phone call. Actually, my mother got the phone call. I was visiting my parents, and she's like, this guy just called me, and who? Yeah, from the US, some good child persons, like, what? And so, yeah,
And then
then
that's, wow, that's so,
that happened.
it's wild. So we don't have too much time left. So I've got one more question for you. You spent quite a bit of time then in Santa Barbara, I think something like 5 years, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then you went back to Zurich, and you mentioned earlier that you were kind of intending to do that between your PhD and when you went to Santa Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
But then going from California back to Switzerland, that must have been a hell of a change. Can you walk me through a little bit about kind of how that felt and why you did it?
Yes, that is a very good point. You think, oh, well, there's the quote unquote first world, and then, everything is the same. You're a world citizen. But really, and of course there are language differences and so on. It's an industrialized place, and but the going back happened. There was an opportunity which I was not looking for, but I applied then when I was told that there is an opportunity for coming back. And as we all know, it's very, very rare. These jobs don't come about, and they don't come often. So it's like I eventually had in mind to come to return to Europe. And then this was almost too early for me in many ways. I it was still an assistant professor, and I wanted to sort of develop this further and explore, and so the coming back, there was an opportunity, and I grabbed it also for family reasons, personal reasons, and it was very difficult to do that. Actually, much more difficult than I ever thought. And with these transitions between places and cultures and so on, it's very clear there's this, this classic readaptation, going out but adapting there and then coming back. You need almost a readaptation, and it's absolutely what happened. I was made aware of it earlier on, that I should think about that. I just didn't realize how difficult it would be. And it was very much necessary, because I grew up academically, I should say, more strongly in the US, more intensively than I had really the formation in Switzerland. I left early for the PhD, and those forming years for academia were spent in the US. So I knew that system, but I didn't really know the system in Switzerland that well, to be honest.
I see. So it must have been quite a different pace, but it sounds like you just saw a gap and took it, which I guess is the moral of that. Well, cool. I'm going to hand you off now to Danny, but there's so much more detail that we can't dig into. Your story is just absolutely fascinating in the different moves and perspectives. So maybe someday, but I'll let you go.
Thank you very much, Levi.
Thank you very much, Levi, and thanks, Sara, for accepting. It's an honor to be on this side of the interview. I want to jump back. We'll talk about the 2000s and maybe the 2010s and into the future a bit later. But I want to jump back for a second to the 90s, to the world where you started, where, as you were saying a minute ago, where you were brought up academically. And I wonder whether you could give us a sense of what the field felt like. It was a time where GI science was starting to crystallize as a full-on discipline, and you came into it from the cartography world. And I suppose cartography and maps have always had a role in society, but probably, and maybe this is one of the things you can pick up if you want, not as prominent as they would later, thanks to things like Google Maps and smartphones, etc. So could we maybe start in the early 2000s and give us a sense of what the field was like? What were the big ideas that the field thought were going to become the next big thing? Whether they did later or not, that might be different.
You meant in the 90s or in the 2000s? Because I would say that there was already.
Let's start with the 90s.
With the 90s. So when it's maybe interesting to know how these things were called. So in the predecessor professorship that I now have in Zurich was called Spatial Data Handling. And so this was maybe, it says a little bit about the field. So there was this, you know, the technology, and it had all this you need to do to transition from digital cartography. Sort of, there was this conference series called AutoCarto. So automating what the human cartographer can do, which the cartographers believe then, never ever this is going to happen, that the art of the cartography can be emulated by an algorithm. And so this transition from very much this the layer cake model, as we were taught and sometimes even taught today, right? So there's this layer view of the world, this cartographic view, literally translating mylar layers where you drafted your maps, you translate them into this digital, like a metaphor. I mean, this is what happens when something new comes in, you have to sort of think of it metaphorically, you know, what do I know in the old world, and then I transfer this metaphorically, like World Wide Web, you know, it's not a web, but it's something I do understand, so I can sort of translate it metaphorically. And so this was sort of this handling, this processing, data processing, a lot of digitizing. We didn't have geographic or geospatial, as it's called today, data. So it had to be first brought into the computer and transferred for maps. So big ideas were there, and sort of automation, sort of support systems or expertise, trying to sort of model it, transform it digitally, and sort of have expert systems, you know, provide sort of the data, the maps on the fly, things like that. So, and visualization was, of course, a big topic. Coming also from the US, in terms of having these big supercomputers, being able now not just to compute and, you know, have text commands, but also have graphics power. So the SIGGRAPH conferences in the early 90s were sort of exciting things where we saw what they were doing with, you know, 3D already, and storm visualization and animation, and the computer could do that. So that was sort of this kind of trying to model what we knew analog, trying to get it into the computer and then do something in the computer. So that would say sort of what was the attraction.
And why, almost as a follow-up question, why do you think it was so hard for cartographers to conceive automatic mapping? You said that they said, well, this will never happen, and evidently they weren't quite right on that. Why do you think it was so hard from their point of view to not see something that was, at least in hindsight, so close to happen?
Maybe, you know, it's kind of also this issue of threat. Who knows? You know, you have this 5,000-year history of cartography. You have, in Switzerland, this is sort of also part of the national treasure, our topo maps. They are, you know, sort of honed and developed, and sort of, you know, this is an expensive trade, and there's a lot of money that was put in to make them great. And they were great, they are great. And so I guess this maybe, yeah, I would see that's sort of maybe a bit of a threat that potentially this actually could happen. But then you have sort of in the last battles, right, of this takeover, you have this kind of like retreat, in the sense, you know, our thing is so perfect. How can you, you know, emulate perfect? And maybe this is something that really happened, that instead of engaging maybe with a new wave, you have this kind of retreat and blockage. So that's my view. I mean, it would be interesting to hear from a cartographer's view, but the fact of the matter is, you know, we have very few cartography granting departments anymore in the world, and which it's not to say this is a good or a bad thing, but it's a fact.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk a bit more about that, what it means today. Before that, I did wanted to get your thoughts a little bit, or at least, or not your thoughts, get your impression on how you leave this process that in 10, 15 years, probably, automatic maps went from being impossible to being something that absolutely everyone without any training would be not only accessing, but using on a daily basis. And I'm curious to hear what that meant for you as someone who had come from cartography, but also had been heavily involved in GI science. And also perhaps, and you can decide how much you want to engage with that, as someone also who wasn't, see how I put this, I get the sense, and this is my view, that the web map revolution wasn't made by by mappers. It was made by web people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess I came to it a bit late, but I've always had, as a geographer, I've always had the feeling, why weren't more geographers in the Google Maps team or in the Keyhole early sort of incarnation of Google Earth? And I'm curious how you saw that sort of from even before it started, arguably, to this world today in which maps are literally everywhere and used by everyone.
It's really, there's so many facets to this. It's a really critical question, and I think, it's like this hindsight 2020, right?
Yes, of course.
So I have to also say that in many ways, even though I'm trained classically, if you will, I have a degree, even if it's not the major, but a minor in cartography. Very quickly, I was, or immediately, I was not really in this traditional, at least from the geomatics or topographic standpoint type of cartography. So I had never really worked on, topo maps. So our cartography was already, I have to say, inspired by a sort of a US style cartography that is at a geography department, not in a topographic mapping agency, where in the classic training was more the engineering style background, the map making, if I say it now sort of simply, or the product oriented. And in our case, it was already about how can I push some new technology, what can animation bring, and what's the theory about how animation may actually be useful to develop something that just not just an animation, but one that it really can work. And so I have to say that, and also my PhD is, I'm hedging here, but I have to come back to your initial question. And my PhD was not at all about real geographic space, which was the irony of it all. So Barbara Buttonfield had already a PhD student, Andres Kupin, working on this idea of, and Helen Kouklelis and Babs were discussing this early on, how you could use cartographic methods, geovisualization methods, for representing data in databases that are not spatial or not geographically spatial or geospatial in some way. So, making maps of text databases, unstructured data. So we were doing that. So that was even weird. So everything was weird. It's like this GIS thing, which was kind of novel, which was in Boulder very small, human and physical were the big ones. And we had to make decisions in GI science, which were 4 of us, 2 PhD students, 2 master students. Will you be trained as a physical geographer and a human geographer? I just randomly picked human because it was so closer in a sense, because humans use maps and not mountains. And so you see that there are lots of layers of why this was so strange. And in cartography, we're not even accepted. I remember very physically where Andre and I would go to a cartography conference, and we were presenting maps of, a database that was not geographic, that was not a topo map. We had, I remember physically at this International Cartographic Association conference for the first time, no questions. They were all what is this? And so you see, there's this we were neither there nor here. And so now back to your question, why cartography missed the boat, let's say. I'm very now critical, self-critical. I think maybe it is, again, it's often space, time, and convergence. It's like the right time, the right space in Santa Barbara, in California, having this idea of digital Earth, right? You had a vice president who was opening in Los Angeles, the Science Museum, Al Gore talking about the Library of the Future. This was really happening. And Keyhole, you mentioned it, you have a system that allows you to look at satellite images seamlessly and sort of fly over the world, the Google Earth idea, right? It was already all there, and of course it was available to the U.S. Army, and then it got sort of popularized or being released to a few people who had access to this keyhole viewer. One of them actually was my good child at UCSB. So I saw it for the first time before Google Earth or Google had, the viewer and the rights to actually bought the system basically. So this was amazing, right? To fly over the world like this seamlessly with these satellite images. And so what I'm saying is a lot of technology and computer science involved, and probably maybe that's really what you needed computer science or sort of computing knowledge to be able to do this and apply it to the graphics or apply it to the maps. And maybe that was definitely not the strength of a classically trained cartographer. They were trained in, I remember for my master's projects for the minor, going into a chemistry lab and then moving the colors around and thinking about moire, how you should do for each color you have to sort of do a different raster so that you don't get these moire effects on your final product. You have to think about, upside down and overside to be able to, when you turn around and print, all these like mechanical things. There was like this huge sort of process of mechanical and analog transformations, printing labels on mylar and cutting them and placing them. I mean, there's a lot of handicraft, really. I mean, or people, I remember at Swiss Topo being able, airbrushing the terrain model or the relief on the Swiss maps. This was like an art. This was like decades of training to be able to do that. And then computing was kind of this new, completely different thing where you needed different skills.
Yes, exactly. Completely. It's the enabling technology weren't the underlying concepts. It was this new thing called computers.
Yes.
And using that almost as a segue for my final question, I want to talk a little bit about the future, because I think there's been a huge change in how we use maps, how we interact with spatial and geospatial information in the last 20 years. And well, there's been a huge change in how we interact with any kind of information, but geospatial is not a difference. But I think there's still a lot that needs to change, or that probably will change, in how we interact with information. And I wanted to pick your brains a little bit for the audience on why do you think it's going to be the next 10 years of interacting with geospatial information? If we had this conversation, saying 10, 15 years, what do you think would have been the main things that we would be talking? What would be the equivalents of the keyholes or the interactive maps in the browser that will be happening in the next decade or two? What do you think is in your future crystal ball?
It's really, that's a tough and mean question, because we're going to go back to maybe not, because we will not have the viewer, right, the YouTube viewer in 10 or 15 years, because
hopefully we will.
So to see what did she say then, and what's the reality. So I guess it's always, I will go back, for 10, 15, 20 years, people talked about VR being the big thing, virtual reality, right? Now it's called the metaverse, someone says. So this has been sort of around the corner for 10 years, 15 years. And yes, we do have it, and we even have it on a small device, a cell phone, but it's still not sort of, really usable. So I guess VR, the sort of the more realistically modeling through a computing system, sort of our environment, our reality. I think we are getting very close and getting closer by the minute. I really think now it's consumer grade, and you can buy a HTC Vive viewer, and so still you need a lot of computing knowledge to be able to actually produce something for it. And then AR, augmented reality. So this is sort of here now. But I think, and this is really the project I wanted to also mention the other people on the project, just a little plug, Ian Roginski, Sara Lanini-Maggi, and Arman Kapai, and Bing-Jie Chen, and now also Enru Lin, is an interdisciplinary team, neuroscientists, cartographers, GI scientists. We are thinking about sort of a system that actually responds to you. Not in the sense of responsive that I have a small screen and I have the browser then on the brick screen and it adapts easily. So that's not what I mean, but the responsive in the sense you have a user, you have an environment, geography, and you have a display. And the display can be on your retina, it could be on a goggle or in a self-driving car, but it's have this interface to this world. And it sort of responds also to you. So it knows, if you're stressed, it knows if you have to meet a deadline, and it serves the information not only in a cartographically adapted way, but also in terms of how you in this situation need to have this information presented to you. Do you have a lot of cognitive load because you're distracted? Are you driving? Are you bicycling? Are you high spatial? What's your preference in terms of modality, so that the information is able to adapt not just to the environment, if it's hot or cold and it's dark or not, then of course cartography changes. We know that from cars today, right? The night view map and the day view map, but it also responds to you, to your needs, and to your cognitive state, to your emotional state, to your preferences. So that's something what we are trying to envision and
cool.
Explore.
Sign me up for that.
We will have stocks to buy. No, kidding. But it will not be Google Maps. I mean, just to be clear, right? Google Maps is not a cartographic product. It's a business model.
Here's a controversial statement for
yes,
the next
10
years.
Of course, I do it, on purpose for this interview. It's a product it's a business model by a company, and it presents that business model in this map-like form. But it's the goal of Google is not to make the best map.
Yeah.
That's really not their goal. And why should they want to have this goal? They have other goals, very successful, and they're very successful at it. And we just happen to get it for free because, a free thing then will allow them to do something, with us, if you like.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna, I think, hand you over now for the sad cocktail party before we move into the future.
Ooh. Thank you very much,
Thank you very much, Sara.
It's always a little bit difficult because what I'd really like to do is pick up on what other people have been saying, especially when you bring the fire like you just did. But we'll see, maybe we can work some of this into our sad dinner party. A dinner party requires good conversation and maybe a little bit of debate. But first, for those who haven't been here before, I first want to thank Professor Fabrikant for playing along. But what we're going to do next, I always say to liven things up, but we never really need it, is that we've asked our guest to imagine that they're invited to a dinner party, a sad dinner party. And the original inspiration for this portion of the interview comes from a UK radio show called Desert Island Discs that asks guests to imagine themselves as castaways. But of course, after all of our pandemic isolation, we're thinking that many of us may feel we've already been marooned on an island, and what we'd really like is some interaction. So we've asked our interviewees to bring along 4 people as dinner companions, a book in case they get bored and have to entertain themselves, and some small talk for the after dinner conversation. And this includes a nugget of wisdom, one regret, one fortuitous event, and one formative memory or experience. And of course, we have less than 15 minutes to do all of this. So I think we'll sort of cherry pick a little bit and see where the conversation takes us. But I wonder if you could get us started just by telling us a little bit about who you'd invite to your dinner party.
Yes, and of course, I thought a little bit about this. And I think I will definitely not invite, and not because I don't want to or it's not okay, or colleagues dear colleagues or people that have been mentors to me, because I have other ways to get in touch with them. So I purposefully invite people I would probably never have a chance to invite. And you may have seen, history and cartography and mass media. So it doesn't even have to be geographic or GIScience-y. So I really like food. I enjoy to sample foodstuffs and from different parts of the world. So I've been a huge fan of, and someone will laugh, who I don't know who is here, but James Cheshire will laugh when he hears this. Jota Motolengi, who's this person, this chef, who's published quite a few books, Mediterranean food. So I will invite him, and because of him, I actually. James Cheshire lured me once to UCL to give a talk, because he said, Sarah, I live near Jota Motolengi's first restaurant, and we'll take you there. And so it didn't happen to the first one, but to another restaurant. But anyway, and why I say that, because the geography plays such a big role. So space in his cooking plays a role. I like also media. I like the movies. I like books. So I will invite, maybe a visual storyteller. I just got the latest Asterix. So if you're an Asterix fan, a geographer actually has an important role in the absolute latest Asterix book. So highly recommend. So I would invite René Goscinny, who actually was the storyteller, not the who drew, but who came up with these geographical stories. Of course, Asterix is so geographic. And it's humorous, something I enjoy. So I will invite him and talk about the geography in these Asterix books. And from the movies, anything humorous who makes us laugh, I will invite. Graphics is important to me, visual impact. So Wes Anderson or Pedro Almodovar, who those of you who know, these are people who have this incredible sense of graphics in their movie. And we will talk about, visualization and colors, and also spatial heterogeneity, MOP, whatever you need to know about this, of course. And then we need music, right? We need an entertainer. And I will invite Sheila E. She's one of the rare female drummers. She has so much energy. I saw her in the 90s as a Prince drummer, incredible person. And so she's just, I would like to get to know her. And then we will talk, of course, about the spatial abilities about drumming and the kit layout, and we can even map drum patterns. So that would be really fun. Or Mikey Hardy, I also thought about him, because he was the reason, ex-Grateful Dead drummer, who actually, he has this very serious project, very interesting project. He wants to fight Alzheimer's using drumming techniques, and then he teamed up with a neuroscientist in the early, 2010-ish or earlier. And then I saw him drumming on stage connected to an EEG, and it was visualized in real time on this huge stage. This just this amazing thing, and it gave me the idea actually for the current grant to think about how neuroscientific methods, and in particular EEG, we can measure people's cognitive process while they're looking at maps, while they're navigating in space, and do this even outdoors, like as they are doing it. So this is really something I would invite them.
Well, when I was thinking about your list of invitees, I was thinking about the sort of the breadth of backgrounds that they come from. And that was making me a little bit curious, I think, about how you think about geography or disciplines in terms of the level of porousness and maybe the role that it's played, not only in your research, but sort of your interior intellectual life, right? Which, of course, I think is something that overlaps strongly with what we do in our day jobs, but is sometimes a little bit separate. But the sort of picking and choosing from across a spectrum of not only visualization, but also, what would you think of it? Intellectual intellectual homes. Yeah. So I'm just curious to hear sort of maybe your thought process and how you settled on these people, but maybe reflecting a little bit on what you think or how you think that might relate to sort of how you've approached your career and the things that excite you.
Yeah, I think I'm in many ways always somehow at this interface of something. I feel like I wanted to become an historian, and I realized I'm not a core historian. I'm not going to stay in an archive for my rest of my life. But I like some of the history thinking in terms of time and causes of events. Like, you know, this is very much something in GI science, like a big research topic representing space and time. And then in geography also, not core human or physical, but in this GI sciences space, which is kind of this emerging new thing, connects. GI science is inherently completely interdisciplinary. I really truly believe it's not geography but it's not just computer science or computers. It's really completely interdisciplinary. And so I have always interfaced. I've always been stimulated with arts through my background. My mother is an artist painter. My brother is a creative. I went to art school and has an ad company, and so the arts, the visual, is always part of my life, and therefore I think geography, with this visualization bit that is so critical and important, I think that was just the perfect sort of interface to bringing together different things that excite me. You know, music, books, literature, mass media. We hear again, mass media communication is this communication aspect. Maybe it's the communication aspect, ways to communicate or understand information through as one aspect.
Do you see this as changing, or do you see this as sort of a benefit of academic life, that we can always be at interfaces or not if we would like to be? Do you see that holding also for the younger people? I mean, you talked about a multidisciplinary project. Do you think that works in the same way that it did 20 years ago?
I really, it's becoming more of a necessity because the problems are so complex. You know, climate change. You know, we need all physical and human and social and economic to work together. But it's almost dangerous. So if in a PhD, right, it's dangerous to tell people, oh, you're in this exciting interdisciplinary arena. In fact, we got the money just because we had to prove how interdisciplinary it will be, the project. But then, you know, where do you make your career? And it gets really difficult. You have, in an academic setting, there is no interdisciplinary department. In fact, I will tell you, this Digital Society Initiative was the first great idea where all the different faculties, we call them faculties or schools in other places of the world, they actually, we came together and said, we need this thing called digitalization. We need to work on this, and we need to have everyone on board. And then the university had sort of a difficulty, is like, what is it? Is it a department? Is it a school? Is it? And there was no structure at the university. We had to actually build it so that everyone could participate from all the different schools and disciplines. So I think we need it more than ever, but it's really hard then to make a career out of it, because it's like, oh, geography, you know a lot about very little, right? So that's just this negative view.
There's that. But I wonder also, I mean, it's not uncommon to have a conversation with, you know, people who are sort of early to mid-career and hear them say, until I get tenure, I'm not going to read a book for fun. Or, you know, I don't watch TV, I don't listen to music because I'm really focusing on the things that are going to produce academic outputs. And
that's sad. But it's true. Some people feel that way. And also you pick the journals. You know, I have to speak to my discipline, and I have to, right? It's often sort of I have to speak to that audience. So I targeted my products to that particular audience. So it's always a particular audience, right?
Did you think you were able to avoid this pressure somehow? Or, I mean, did you?
No, I absolutely not. I think that's really sort of maybe that's a reason, right? So you can pick. It's like almost like figure skating. I often say that to students with their projects. You can do 3 triple tulips and then fall all of them, and then you don't have a great grade, or you don't succeed. Or you can do something really very specific and narrow and tiny, but be very deep and perfect at it. That can be done, right? And then there may be the smart move, but I think for me it's a total boring move to just do this one thing, like this one field, and then and that's fine, because there's some people who really get to the nitty-gritty detail and the bottom of it, right? And they get very, very narrow. That doesn't work for me, but I think it's not a good strategy often in terms of succeeding academically.
Yeah, well, this is a good place for us to segue into the after dinner conversation. And I wonder if you were to give advice. I mean, you offered some advice when we went through this beforehand, but I wonder if you were to offer some advice to those, not necessarily more junior to you, but just in general to the world, what advice might you give?
I mean, I would stick to still, I think in the end, one can be smart about, it's like CVs, they look so linear and planned, right? And often it's like serendipity and so on. So I think what drives me and it really is to be brave, to persevere and really follow your dreams. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but it's really, I think that what defines me. I say brave because, as you said earlier, right, sometimes we have to do things we don't really want, but we know maybe they're not necessary in an academic setting, and sometimes it's to realize, no, actually there's also moments where we have to be brave and not do the mainstream, and that I also say as a female academic, because that requires a lot of bravery. I hope this is the correct English term. Sometimes, because especially in our fields, our GI science technical fields, where we still are not the majority, it needs bravery.
Did you feel
perseverance?
I'm going to slowly start to wind down. I probably have time for one more question about our sad dinner party, but did you feel conscious in these moments of, say, coming to the US to do a PhD and deciding to go back to Switzerland, going to Santa Barbara, going to Buffalo, that were you conscious of having to steel yourself to bravery? Or
oh yes, I didn't want to go to Santa Barbara initially. It was like this is like too scary. This is such a scary place with all these big names and important figures. It took a lot of bravery on my side to actually really go. It took me a while to decide, and it absolutely, I think it takes also bravery to leave your country, your comfort zone, and go to a different culture, a different place. I think that requires a lot of bravery, at least for me. And maybe the curiosity was just so strong that if I thought about it more clearly and carefully, I would never have dared to do something like that. But I think that's maybe the curiosity has sort of keeps you going.
Yeah. And I suppose somewhere in there is a willingness to take risks, but yeah. So there's lots that I still would like to talk about, but I'm curious a little bit about your regret.
Exactly. So I meant it really. So I initially wanted to become a sports journalist, and I was like, that would be so cool. You would go to events and talk about them and write about them, and so. And then one day I was actually in the exams, oral exams for this a while back, for the geography, the final geography. We have final geography exams at the master's level, and those who take a minor in geography, and that changed completely now. But they had this final exam, and then we asked the people, what is your background, where will you work, and so on, so that we could gauge a little bit how the final exam, that oral, which is like it was a half an hour, covering everything in geography would go. And then this one person said, I'm a sports journalist. I'm like, oh my God, it's like, here I am, a professor of geography, and I wished, I had your career. So it was really sort of funny to have that. So, but it's on a light note. I'm very happy where I am. But I thought that would be super cool.
Yeah. Well, we have our whole crew here. What happens is that by the end, we all have little questions and bits and pieces we would like to pick up on. So I'm going to turn it back over to Danny and to Levi. And then often there are some questions or comments from the audience as well. And with that.
Yeah. Little questions or bits to pick up. I think I could take probably a few more hours with those little ones, but I'm not going to bore the audience. And we do have a question from the audience. So this comes from Nick Bierman. Thanks very much, Nick. And he says, picking up on the Google Maps reference, how much will the future of GI science or GIS, whatever that may be, including the responsive interface you mentioned, which sounds great, be commercial? How much of that would be commercial? That is Google, Amazon, Alexa, etc. How much will it be open source, and how much will it be a combination of the two?
Oh, excellent question. And I have to now have my hat on of being awarded this grant. It has to be open source, of course. And I'm a strong believer. We do try and put this out there. We have not yet, something to prepare or to share, but I think it has to be. If it's with taxpayer money, it must be open source. Now, will Google buy it and then I will be, will they buy it off me and I will be very rich? I doubt it. And how much will it be commercial? I think, the car companies, I'm not even thinking about Google, but I think in terms of sort of mobility, navigation, and responsiveness of geographic information. The car industry, I don't have insights. I do know have some of our graduates work in this context. They are, think of these self-driving cars. There's a huge need and market for such kind of novel kind of sharing of geographic information.
And I'm going to press there a little bit. I don't think you have to convince Levi, Rachel, or I about the benefits of open source, but for the audience that might be slightly more skeptical and that might say, well, if it worked out with Google Maps, why is it so important that it be open source? What is the value that, say, handing these technologies or handing the future of these technologies really to big corporations? What are the risks we're running, perhaps, or what's the value that is at least not entirely run and driven by these institutions?
I think one thing I would say, and that comes up again and again, also we had this topic prominently, the Digital Society initiatives in many different ways, biases in the algorithms, transparency of computing. And I'm not saying that open source will solve all of this, but I'm saying that there's at least a chance that people can have, can look at some of the code, can improve that code, and can just sort of have a clearer picture of what the code does, and perhaps even sort of improve it in that way. So I think that is something of an advantage if it's available to everyone. Of course, you can do something nasty with it, clearly, and some of the code is also not good, and so on and so forth. But at least we have a chance to have an insight, and looking at the potential biases and so on that these algorithms create or emphasize.
That's so important.
And not to say that all of them have biases. I'm just saying it just gives an opportunity to everyone, everyone to look at this.
Laying them out clearly so we can fix them, hopefully.
Exactly.
Well, I think with that, we'll probably acknowledge the fact that it's getting a bit late for... Oh, Rachel, did you want to... Okay.
Just one question, which was that when you said that Google is not a cartographic product, I suppose... I think I understand where you're coming from, but I also had this moment of just thinking, well, what would be a cartographic product in the 21st century? And if the goal... aside from making money, which I think is, I would not call a cartographic product, but if the goal is to help people find things, then Google Maps
Sure. I mean, Google Maps is a map, and it has the symbols, and I meant it in the sense it's not necessarily, and that's not true. That's also changed. I have to say, there's some cartographers also at Apple, by the way. There's colleagues in our GIScience field that work at Apple. Of course, there are people that will bring in some cartographic knowledge, but I don't think that's the goal of, maybe I'm completely mistaken and wrong, but I don't think that Google wants to have a great map. It's just, they want to have a map.
Well, what's a great map? Yeah, I suppose I was just like, what is a great map? Because I bet they spend a lot of time actually thinking about symbology and how it is that somebody walking down the street looking for a coffee shop is going to, from all of this information that Google's throwing at them, actually hone in on the most useful. So I think you're right. I'm not a cartographer, and I'm not a fan of Google, but maybe cartography changes over time.
And now we are in the midst of discussion. I really don't think that they think that way. I mean, because then the product would have to look different in terms of cartographically speaking, and also the empirical research that is suggesting differently. So the map would then be, overloaded in many cases. There's lots of irrelevant information on that map for certain of your tasks, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying for every task, and I'm not saying that the Swiss topo maps are useful for every task, but I think that would be one just quick answer, that the graphic density would have to change depending on what you want to do with that map.
No, and there's not a day that goes by where I don't do something with Google Maps where I think, if only they knew that this is how I want to use this platform, then surely they would change it, and they haven't. So.
And my responsive one, and my responsive one would actually know about your task. It would be adapted to your use context, your task goal, which would be the holy grail, right? So that would be one way why the responsiveness would be so important.
Well, I didn't mean to make us go over by a few minutes, but of course, I mean, you can't say something like that and not have somebody want to talk more about it. Maybe someday we have a sad dinner party and we can,
yes,
have a few glasses of red wine and argue about it. That'd be fantastic.
With great pleasure.
It is a fascinating discussion. So I think I will kind of suggest that we draw to a close, acknowledging that it's late for many. My kind of last points is thank you very much, Professor Fabrikant, for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you about so many different things.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be invited by all of you. This is a fantastic series, and I've been inspired by my your pre-invitees. So it's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this. This is fantastic.
And to the audience, I'd like to let you know that we are planning on having additional events in this series. So we have a couple of further events lined up for interviews. You can always find more information about that through Rachel, Danny, or I on Twitter. I've also put the Spatial Analytics and Data Turing events page in the notes here from the chat. And you can see that our next event in the series is on Tuesday, the 14th of December. We're hoping for this to be a bit of a panel discussion. I can't exactly remember the title. I'm sorry.
I can.
Okay.
This is the Sad Christmas Special.
The Sad Christmas Special.
The Sad Christmas Special, and it's All I Want for Christmas. The Ghosts of Christmas, Past, Present, and Future. I think we went a little bit crazy with the Christmas theme, but yes, should be an exciting panel about data, how we use it, how we should use it, and how we hope to use it.
So please join us for that. Register on the Turing link that I've put in the chat below. As always, this will be posted to YouTube, hopefully shortly after I managed to get it processed and uploaded. But thank you to everybody for attending today, and we hope to see you in the future for more sad stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.